You think about Bump Elliott, but Bump Elliott was often criticized for the Frank Lauterbur and the Bob Cummings hire. And I remember talking to Bump at Hayden's introductory press conference. I said, what do you think of this guy? A lot of people are going, Hayden Fry from North Texas. How did you arrive at that? And Bump says, there's something different about Coach Fry. Obviously, his track record speaks for itself. He took teams at SMU and North Texas into Ohio State and Michigan and played them off their feet. And he said, it really doesn't matter what I think of him. I just think he can coach. And if he can't, I'll be leaving here with him. That one always stuck with me. I'm walking out of the press conference thinking, Bump Elliott's worried about job security? Here's a guy who hired Dan Gable, Lute Olson, Hayden Fry, three Hall of Famers right there. He's worried about job security. But, what it points out, Brian, is that was the state of college athletics then. It is now. You get so many years, and if you don't get the job done, you're, as Podolak used to say, 88 and out the gate.
Welcome to the Gallery and Hurley Unfiltered podcast, Iowa Football Rewind.
Subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast player to get a behind-the-scenes look that you won't find anywhere else.
Tonight, we are excited to have Gary Dolphin, voice of the Hawkeyes from 1997 for football and basketball for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Dolph, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you guys. Great to be with a couple of, I'd say old, but I would never do that, former Hawks.
It's old. We'll take it. We're old for sure.
Seems like yesterday, huh?
Yeah.
I remember the first play I called from scrimmage, my first game in 1997. Matt Sherman turned around and handed off to Tavian Banks. It was an off-guard play against Northern Iowa. And after Tim Dwight had run the opening kick out to around the 40-yard line, Banks goes 66 yards on the first play from scrimmage. That's how my play-by-play career got started at Kinnick Stadium. And it's been many more highlights than negative yardage plays since then. And I remember that year vividly because, as you guys remember, it was a major change going from a number of flagship stations carrying Iowa football and basketball to now one network, and that was Learfield. But the university, Bob Bowlesby was the athletic director, decided to keep Jim Zabel and Bob Brooks and Ron Gonder involved in the broadcast. And Ed Podolak and I would do the games, but Z and Brooksy and Gonder would do the pregame and the halftime and the postgame show. So we had a crowded broadcast booth, but only at Iowa can you pull that off. And I remember Bowlesby telling me after year one, I said, Bob, I wasn't sure what I was signing up for, but 5 guys with microphones. He goes, and you know how Bowlesby could talk. I know you'd be the best traffic cop of them. That's why I hired you. So get it done. And it lasted about 4 or 5 years. Eventually, those 3 Hall of Famers retired and went their own way, and it settled into Podolak and I. And here we are, going on 28 years later. It's really phenomenal how time flies, and some names change. Names like the Gallery stay the same because I got to see 3 or 4 of the Galleries play football at Iowa. And I'm sure that next generation is going to be coming down the line pretty quick. Great memories from then to present day.
Yeah, thanks for taking us down that walk. When I was doing some research for this, I got reminded of Bob Brooks and the special human that he was. My family connected with him because he was around still when I was playing. So what was your relationship like with those guys? And did they help you a lot getting started? You obviously had been working a bit before that, but what was that transition like, or what was your relationship with those guys like?
It was a real easy transition because when I first started covering Iowa football or broadcasting Iowa football in 1973 out of Dubuque, the radio station in Dubuque. And in those days, I think we had maybe 8 or 9 stations, 6 or 7 for sure, that did all the games, would fly with the team. And KDTH up in Dubuque was one of those stations. So I got to know Jim Zabel and Ron Gonder and Bob Brooks, Frosty Mitchell. There's some legendary names. Gene Clausen was doing the games out of Iowa City, KXIC radio. And so there were 6 or 7 radio stations. We'd crowd in the back of a DC-10 and travel with, I kid people, but for sure, my first year doing Iowa football was the 0-11 year. And I told Podolak in 2015 when the Hawks went 12-0, I said, buddy boy, we've come full cycle from 0-11 to 12-0. And this doesn't get any better than this. I'd rather have the 12-0 than the 0-11. But I remember that 0-11 team vividly. Had a guy named Dan McCarney starting in the offensive line at guard. Bobby Elliott was a defensive back. Craig Clemens was a #1 draft pick of the Chicago Bears, a head-hunting, hard-hitting safety. So Iowa had some great individual pieces in that 0-11 team, but they were very undersized compared to Ohio State. I remember Coach Lauterbur, Frank Lauterbur, at the time, had 250-pound guards he was starting. Ohio State had 300-pound tackles. And so it was really a mismatch in the offensive line in terms of size. It had nothing to do with effort. It had everything to do with just grit and having a big grill. And we didn't have much of that at Iowa. I think Butch Caldwell was the quarterback. And so it was a learning experience for me. But along the way, I got to know Bob Brooks and Ron Gonder and Jim Zabel very well because I hung out with them socially. I was a young broadcaster. They were established veterans and outstanding in their own right. So it was a very easy transition when 1997 came along and Learfield decided that they were going to keep Ed Podolak and Bobby Hansen as the analysts. I tell people, look, I had the best of both worlds. I had a Super Bowl champion as a football analyst and an NBA champion as a basketball analyst, and both were great players at Iowa. And right up until 2 years ago, that dream continued. But it was unique, but then Iowa radio has always been unique. Nick, as you and Brian know, it's unlike any other production really in the Big Ten because of the passion for AM radio in particular, but radio in general, because Iowa's an ag state. The farmers love their radio, especially on Saturday afternoon when the Hawkeyes are playing. And that hasn't changed despite all the changes which we've weathered here in media for the last, since social media really came on the scene. Back then, even in 1997, you had radio, television, newspapers. Now you've got what? 50 different ways you can listen to or watch an Iowa football game. And so it's different. But when I took the job, I was doing Northwestern in Chicago, working for the Bears and TV production, and very happy to be calling Big Ten games. I was doing Northwestern basketball. It afforded me the opportunity to get back into football, which I had really enjoyed in the 70s. I did Iowa for 5 years in the 70s. And that's where I got to know Zabel, Gonder, and Brooks up close and personal. And we'd go out to dinner on road trips. We'd hang out together during the week when the coaches, whether it's Cummings or Hayden Fry, had their weekly press conferences, right on through the Kirk Ferentz era. We were all well established when we got together in 1997, and it lasted for 5 or 6 years into the New Deal. And right up until the day Bob Brooks and Jim Zabel passed, we remained good friends. Ron Gonder is pushing 90, I think, right now. That's hard to believe. And Ron's retired, of course, and living in Cedar Rapids. I stay in touch with Ron, I go to lunch every now and then with him, and it still is it's Iowa. We're buddies till the very end, and that won't change.
Yeah, great people and great story. You were there for the transition from Hayden into Coach Ferentz. Talk about that journey and like what that means to you to see that accomplishment over time and the level of success, and I guess more even the level of player that he's had over the years.
Absolutely. I got to know Kirk quite well when he was on Hayden's staff. Coach Ferentz came to Iowa in 1981. He was a grad assistant at Pitt. Pitt had won a national championship with a great staff out there. And Joe Moore, of course, was Kirk's mentor, the great offensive line guru. And the true story is when Hayden needed an offensive line coach, Joe Moore called Coach Fry up from Pittsburgh and said, Coach, you got to interview this young guy. His name is Kirk Ferentz. And of course, Hayden, who? I had never heard of Kirk, but he very much respected Joe Moore. Joe Moore had been around the block a few times and developed great offensive linemen, Mark May to Jimbo Covert, and on, all these Hall of Famers. Ferentz loves to tell the story about when he landed at the Cedar Rapids airport for his interview. Barry Alvarez picked him up in an AMC Hornet or a Chrysler K car. I can't remember which model it was, but that's one of the great stories. You think of these coaches today with their rental cars or their auto dealer cars. Most of them are big honking SUVs. But here comes Barry Alvarez, the linebacker coach, in a Chrysler K car. Ferentz loved to tell that story. It's a great story. Kirk's a great storyteller, as you guys know. But he said from the moment he met Hayden Fry, he knew Iowa City is where he wanted to be. And he got the job. And 7 or 8 years into that, he left for his first head job at the University of Maine. And that's another great story in and of itself. The athletic director at this college in Dubuque, who got his first Division I job at the University of Maine, was a guy named Kevin White. And Kevin White just retired as the AD at Duke maybe a year ago. He spent a dozen years at Duke, was the athletic director at Notre Dame for a lot of years prior to that, and ran the programs at Arizona State and Tulane after he left Maine. And Kevin White called Coach Fry. Hayden always had a hard, fast mantra where if you want to hire one of my coaches, you need to call me first and ask for permission to interview him. Kevin White called Hayden Fry and said, Coach, I'd like to interview one of your assistant coaches for the head job at Maine. And Hayden Fry said, who would that be, Kevin? He goes, Kirk Ferentz. Yeah, sure, fine, young coach. You go ahead and interview him. And Kirk took the job at Maine, and the rest is history. They both split up and went their separate ways after that. But to this day, Kirk Ferentz and Kevin White remain very close friends. Kevin White, one of the great, really, of all time, in my view, a sure Hall of Famer. But now fast forward to, I guess, 1999. And of course, the rumor was that Bob Stoops was going to be the next head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes following Hayden's retirement. And of course, things don't always work out the way they're planned. But at that time, it was just the invention of the $1 million a year coaching salaries. Oklahoma jumped the gun on the Hawks and offered Bob a package he couldn't refuse. And Bob took the Oklahoma job, and who can blame him? He ultimately won a national championship there. So now here was Bob Bowlesby and the committee that was interviewing candidates back to square one. And I believe they interviewed Chuck Long. I know they interviewed Kirk Ferentz, obviously. There were others in the mix, but ultimately Bob Bowlesby chose, or at least recommended, Kirk for the job. And I think because of his familiarity with the Iowa program. And I remember the day of his press conference was the first conversation I had with Kirk. We were together in a room afterwards getting ready to do an interview for the then weekly television show that we ran at Iowa. And I remember that baby-faced, pitch black hair Kirk Ferentz talking about he was going to take everything he had learned from Hayden Fry and implement his own philosophy at the University of Iowa, and what he had learned from Coach Fry, but really what he thought was necessary to take the program into the next era, which was the era of 2000 and beyond. And I've learned, guys, over the years, the cupboard wasn't completely bare when Hayden retired, but it was pretty close. The first couple of years were 1-10, and I think it was 2-9 the second year. But it turned in year 3. Typically, it takes 5 years minimum at a program like Iowa to get it back on track. But Hayden had so much success there that the program was well known and well established. Kirk he took his time putting together a staff. But when he was done, he had a phenomenal staff in place. Guys that could recruit, guys that could draw attractive players both academically and physically to the University of Iowa. And in year 3, they went to a bowl game and beat Mike Leach and Texas Tech in the Alamo Bowl with guys like Nate Kading and Bob Sanders and other names that I don't need to go into. You know who they are. But since 2001, almost 25 years now, it's been an incredible ride with Coach Ferentz. 12 consecutive winning seasons, 23 and 24 years. And you can really take that for granted. When it used to be Iowa can't win in football or win consistently, now it's, gee, we're only winning 8 or 9 games a year. Come on, let's get to the playoffs. The bar keeps getting set an inch or two higher each and every year with Coach Ferentz. But you guys know as well as I do, he loves that kind of pressure. He thrives on that kind of challenge or that kind of gauntlet thrown down. And that's not going to change. And I don't see the guy giving up the reins for some time. Good for him.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about that and how he deals with things and treats his players and stuff. We talked to the Book brothers, and the younger Book, Jeff, was talking about how they missed going to bowl game in 2000 and how Kirk was really devastated by that they were able to get that done and then gave them actually watches from the next season. So you get those stories and you're like, okay, that's the important thing here. Yeah, we'd love to be in the playoffs every year and win a national championships, but when it comes down to it, that's the fabric of what it is and what's important in the whole situation. So I think that was great stories for us to hear and gives people a little more of an insight of, okay, yeah, he's super passionate. He's apologizing to his team that it didn't get it done for him. That's a leader. That's someone who really has got in tune with the situation, I think.
Yeah, that second year when they, granted, it was either 3-8 or 2-9. I forget the record, but Ryan Hansen intercepted that pass, and I think either first overtime, maybe it was the second overtime at Penn State that year, and they knocked off the vaunted Nittany Lions of Joe Paterno, who had a great team that year. The next week, the Hawks came home to wrap up the regular season against Northwestern and knocked off the Wildcats. All Northwestern had to do was win in Iowa City that day to go to the Rose Bowl. And the Iowa defense revved up, knocked down the Wildcats. They had a great running game. They had a solid defense, and the Hawks found a way to win. So the end of that year was 3-9, 3 victories, 9 defeats. But what a springboard into the next year. The guys couldn't wait to get to their off-season training and conditioning, strength and conditioning program. And the next year they go 7-5 and could have been 9-3. They lost a couple close games, but they were revved up when they went into the Alamo Bowl down in San Antonio and took on a terrific Texas Tech team with Coach Leach at the helm. Ironically, one of Coach Ferentz's favorite guys, Mike Leach. Just loved the way he used his sense of humor as a motivating factor to win everywhere Mike Leach went. And Coach Ferentz and Coach Leach cut from a little different cloth, but certainly philosophically, they're on the same page. And I know Kirk was devastated when we lost Coach Leach, 2 years ago or whenever it was, 3 years ago maybe. But he always told me, he said, I was listening to Leach on the way into work this morning. Well, I was stopping at Starbucks at Hy-Vee, and Mike Leach had a very popular radio show on Fox Sports on XM satellite. Ferentz listened to him every morning because he just enjoyed his company, whether it was on radio or in person. And I think that's one of the real draws of college football is you have so many unique coaching characters. Kirk Ferentz, laid back, stoic, but boy, don't ever cross him because he's got a mind like an elephant. And he just handles himself and the way he's built this program into, as you guys know, if you can be consistent and do it every year and win every year, usually the accolades will take care of themselves. And as often as Kirk is criticized for not winning the big game, you go around and talk to coaches around the country or at the Big Ten meetings this week in Vegas, they'll tell you exactly what they think of Coach Ferentz. He is a trailblazer, and his consistency, the solidness of his character can never be questioned. And that's a lost art today.
Speaking of characters, Coach Fry, so it sounded like you were not there when Coach Fry took over. You had just stopped doing the football broadcast. What was your relationship prior to taking the job in '97? Tell us a little bit about your interactions with Hayden in those couple of years or prior, if you had some.
Yes, I knew Hayden very well. I did Iowa football originally from '73 through 1978. And was when Bob Cummings was let go. Coach Fry came in the 78-79 transition. I went into television in 1977, did Iowa football for one more year. And we had some great players. I remember specifically, because I'm from the Dubuque area, Tom Rusk was a all Big Ten middle linebacker for 2 straight years. I remember Hayden Fry told me once, he says, I always regret I didn't get to coach Tom and Rusk for 1 year. But Cummings, think about Bob Cummings coming from Massillon, Ohio high school, never coached college before, but that was a juggernaut of a high school program in Massillon. He had a 5-6 year. He had a 4-7 season. They knocked off UCLA. They beat Nebraska when both were ranked in the top 10. Bob Cummings gets sold a little bit short for what he accomplished. And when Hayden got here in 79, he knew he had a sprinkling of really good football players left over from the Cummings era, just didn't have enough of them. And Hayden, kind of like Kirk, the same recipe, got it turned in 3 years, which was really incredible. And not only got it turned in 3 years, but went to the Rose Bowl with that great defense led by Tippett and Bortz and others. But I knew Hayden well because I would cover the Hawks on a weekly basis through TV. I was anchoring a local sportscast and got to know Coach Fry quite well. Interviewed him a lot. I was very involved with the I Club in Dubuque, and we had Coach Fry up a number of times, always emceed those events. And so, yeah, got to know Coach Fry. Bump Elliot I had known quite well up until that time. Of course, Bump was the creme de la creme in terms of quality and class. Not to get off subject here, but Bump Elliot was often criticized for the Frank Lauterbur and the Bob Cummings hire. And I remember talking to Bump at Hayden's introductory press conference. I said, Bump, what do you think of this guy? A lot of people are going, Hayden Fry from North Texas. How did you arrive at that? And Bump says, there's something different about Coach Fry. Obviously, his track record speaks for itself. He took teams at SMU and North Texas into Ohio State and Michigan and played them off their feet. And he said, it really doesn't matter what I think of him. I just think he can coach. And if he can't, I'll be leaving here with him. I remember Bump's line. That one always stuck with me. But because I remember after talking to Bump that day, I'm walking out of the press conference thinking, Bump Elliott's worried about job security? Here's a guy who hired Dan Gable, Lute Olson, Hayden Fry, and he's worried, 3 Hall of Famers right there. He's worried about job security. But, what it points out, Brian, is that was the state of college athletics then. It is now. You get so many years, and if you don't get the job done, as Podolak used to say, 88 and out the gate. But Bump and Hayden really got along well. Bump, the polished, well-spoken Midwesterner, great player at Michigan with Tom Harmon, and incredible academician, as well as an unbelievable athletic director and administrator. There aren't many guys. I think he might be the only one to join as many Hall of Fames as he has as a player, as a head coach, as an assistant coach, and as an athletic director. I think he's in all the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame. So he obviously got it right with Hayden Fry. But Coach Fry and I got along. I loved his down-home humor. I know we try not to get off color, but so I was doing Hayden's weekly radio show, as I do Kirk's to this day. And Kirk can take criticism a lot better than Hayden Fry could. So Hayden had the ball rolling. We're talking 1997 now, and he'd been to 100 bowl games, and a regular caller to the weekly show called in and was very critical of the way Iowa was running the football. And he gave Hayden a couple plays on the air. You run this belly option off right guard. And Hayden never responded, just obviously sat there and politely listened. And he said, I'm drawing those up on a napkin. Thank you, Brian, and appreciate the input. So I right away, as a host of a radio show, I wanted to go to a break. And I thought, I think this is a good time to take a break. And I said, we'll be back with more Call Coach Fry in just a minute here on the Hawkeye Radio Network. And I get to the break, and I'm at a studio in Cedar Rapids. Hayden is in his office in Iowa City, because in those days you didn't go out to Carlos O'Kelly's or View Rooftop. Hayden, Tom Davis, they had no interest in doing a live show in front of an audience. So there's about a 20-second pause in our 90-second break, and I didn't say anything. Pretty soon I hear, Dolph, is that guy still on the line? I go, no, coach, he's gone. I cut him off. And there's another 5-second pause. He goes, stupid son of a bitch. And that was it. And I go, that's what Hayden wanted to say, and probably would have if I left his mic open. So we came back from the break, and Coach Fry, he goes right into his comedic routine right out of the break as if nothing ever happened. So to me, the aura, the draw to coaches, I love head coaches no matter what level, because they've been there, done that, and nobody did it better than Hayden Fry. But yeah, at the end, it was very difficult, quite honestly. Bobby Elliot had been diagnosed with that rare leukemia. Hayden had hired a couple of young coaches, like a Brett Bielema, like a Chuck Long, who were trying to feel their way and learn the game. Some were gone by then, but that last season in particular, the last 2 years, you could see it sliding a little bit. And I believe we were 4-8 the last year, and went to Minnesota in the battle for Floyd or Rosedale and got thumped by the Gophers. They had a really good team. I think Glenn Mason was the head coach at Minnesota at the time. And I'm not going to sit here and say you could see the end was close, because when you did what Hayden Fry did at Iowa, and let's all agree, it all changed when Hayden Fry came to Iowa. And the Hawks are on this roll now, not just in football, but really in all sports, due in large part to what Hayden Fry did. But you could see it coming. And I know Hayden was tickled pink that Kirk got the job. He wanted one of his guys to succeed him. Hayden was there, 19, 20 years? Kirk's going on 26. And I get this all the time. How does one school have two football coaches in almost 50 years, and three, now four athletic directors in that same time span, 55 years, really, when you count Bump. But really, between Bump and Bob Bowlesby, it was two ADs for 30 years. Gary Barta lasted 10, 12 years. But Iowa, we're not opposed to change, but boy, when we settle into a good thing, we really like it, and willing to put up with a bad year or a perceived bad year here and there. But yeah, Hayden was the best. And I call him every year on his birthday in February, right up until almost the time he passed here a couple of years ago, and wish him happy birthday. He goes, Dolph, let me tell you something. The good news is I'm another year older. The bad news is I'm another year older. And he just loved to tell those one line, hayseed, Texas. The amazing thing about Hayden Fry that I say to this day is he never lost that Texas drawl. He knew that the moms and the grandmothers, and you guys know what I'm talking about, they loved the way Hayden Fry delivered his talk, and he never lost it. And that's part of his shtick. He'd have been great back in the vaudeville days. Let's put it that way.
We've gotten a lot of the stories of the recruiting process from guys as they're explaining when Coach Fry shows up at their house, he meets their family, and yeah, many times the mom or the grandma is very impressed with Coach Fry, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with the guy signing. So that's very true.
And I thought of this often. That's a great point, Brian. How do you think Hayden Fry would adapt to today's NIL transfer portal? Not very well, I don't think. I know how tough it's been on Coach Ferentz, and yet Kirk's adapted and he's fine, and we'll move forward and we'll be able to get players whether you're paying or developing them. You're spot on, because not only did you have Hayden Fry walking into mom's living room, but you had Lute Olson walking into mom's living room as well at the same time. So how could you turn down Lute Olson or Hayden Fry? And of course, Gable was the god of wrestling. So the 70s and 80s were quite special for Iowa athletics. And then when Lute did decide to leave and go to the warmer climes of Arizona, a totally opposite personality in George Raveling comes rolling into town from Southern California and Washington State University. And George, he could get players now. And He decided after 3 or 4 years, however long he was in town, but Tom Davis walked right in. And so we've been so blessed with outstanding head coaches in most sports at Iowa. You could put Hayden up there on that same pedestal because they really changed the dynamics at the University of Iowa.
And you talk about longevity. It was from the receptionist, Rita at the football office, to training staff, to announcers, to like play-by-play, all that stuff. Everyone is just a long-term commitment and long-term kind of fixtures at these places, which is great. And awesome, like for my family, which we were there over a span of like 13 years, whatever. You become family friends, like just people, the program, it makes a special part of that. You talked about doing the weekly radio show and some of those pieces. So I'm curious on your process of how you approach these games, how you would get ready for them, your mindset. You're really trying to give people a view of the game, right? You're trying to tell a story of what's happening and do that well and give an insight into the game. So talk about what it's like to call a game. It's when you're done, are you like, oh my God, exhausted? So go into that part if you would, please.
Here we are several weeks out from the start of a new season. And I've had a file started on Albany, the Hawks opener, August 30th, familiarizing myself with the roster. The roster can change now because of NIL daily, but I know who the stars are coming back for Albany. They've got a new head coach. He was interim a year ago, their former head coach. And they were the winning program. They were 4-8, I believe, a year ago, but in Division II, they were a powerhouse up until they decided to join Division I a few years back. Their former head coach is now a coordinator at Penn State. So that's a nice, intriguing angle for Iowa Penn State, certainly when they play, but also a coach who's come back to the Big Ten. I basically try and familiarize it. Non-conference is a lot more difficult to prepare for than conference, other than Iowa State. Year to year, what you're going to get with the Cyclones. And year to year, what you're going to get with the Big Ten teams you play, because I've seen them for 28 years. But typically, if we're midway through the season, when I get home Saturday night, I just crash from the day's game and let my mind clear. And then by Sunday, late Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, I'm pulling the file on the next team, the next opponent. I've got a great producer, engineer, Corey Sheets, who sends me the two deeps from the previous week's game so I can compare notes with the Hawks and how we've done historically, just start to form a thought process. On Monday, I listen to, if they have a Monday press conference, a lot of coaches do have a press conference on Monday. Kirk's is always on Tuesday, but I have my own personal press conference with Coach Ferentz every Wednesday night for 90 minutes when I do his radio show. And there isn't a whole lot you're going to tell me about Kirk Ferentz from one week to the next that I don't already know. And if I need to know something, I'll pick up the phone and call him. And he's always been great about taking my call or texting back and forth. I do want to get to know the opposing coach, particularly if it's a new coach, a PJ Fleck or a James Franklin, or obviously some of the guys that have been around for a lot of years. Their habits, their nuances, what they like to do. I study the history of the series and just put it all in front of me, because you're not going to use it or use most of it to come game day. Tuesday, I listen to Kirk's press conference. I listen to the opposing coach. By Tuesday night, I've got a pretty good feel for what the opposing coach is saying and what they want to do against the Hawks. Wednesday, I drive down to Iowa City. Back in the day when you guys practiced in the afternoon, I'd always go to live practice on Wednesday, then head out to wherever we're doing Kirk's radio show. Now with morning practices, I got to be a little bit more picky as to when I go down to Iowa City. But the great thing about practices now is they're all on computer disk, and I can access that here from my office in my home, and that makes it a lot easier. So I watch a lot of the previous week's game plus practices from Tuesday and Wednesday before I head down to Iowa City. Do coaches shows, of course, Coach Ferentz show Wednesday night. Of course, I'm making a lot of notes during our 90-minute visit. And we do take calls. We don't take calls, but we do take Facebook postings, Twitter, all the social media. And there's a lot of stuff, frankly, that our fans hit on that I never thought of. That's a good question, good angle to talk about for Saturday's game, depending on who the opponent is, of course. By Wednesday night, I've got the firm two deeps that I'm looking at a lot to familiarize myself with name and number. That could change, certainly. But by Thursday, I'm pretty well set with how I think the game's going to go. Now, only at Iowa do we have a 2-hour pregame show. So we're putting features together during the week, interviews with the Nick galleries, pick out a couple players that we want to feature in our pregame show, because I'm a stickler for, if you got to fill 2 hours, we're not just going to fill 2 hours. We're going to supplement 2 hours with good, solid programming, because you guys grew up with Iowa football. I grew up with Iowa football, and I know how those fans think. They're driving to the game. They're going to set up their tailgater. They want good material when they're driving from, because most of our fans drive 2 to 3 hours. Certainly, very few drive less than an hour, whether it's in traffic in Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, Dubuque, Sioux City. They come from long distances, and man, they've got the Hawkeye Radio Network affiliate on their frequency all the way to Iowa City. I know because I hear about it throughout the year. And so that's fun. So we've got Rob Brooks does our sideline reporting. Rob does a couple features throughout the year. We do a lot of interview content. We're live out in the Krause Family Center out there beyond the south end zone when the team buses pull up. So there's a lot of live, outstanding drama that the fans love to listen to from back black to kickoff. When I get down to Thursday, I pretty much bunker in here at my house in my office and put it all together sequentially. Friday morning, I head down to Iowa City. I interview Coach Ferentz, always the afternoon before the game. Interview Athletic Director Beth Getz or Gary Barta in past. And when I'm done with my interviews, and of course throughout the week, we glean quips from the opposing coach. If the coach, a lot of coaches don't like to talk to opposing radio. That's fine. I get it. It's not like I'm going to throw you a grenade for a question. I usually toss pretty good softballs because I'm not here to offend anybody or pry about injuries. But if they don't want to do a live Zoom, and most of them will, I think they feel they're impressed that I would call them and ask them to do an interview for the Hawkeye Radio Network pregame, because that doesn't happen. But that is Iowa radio. We keep coming back to what makes Iowa radio unique. So I'll edit that down, get that in the can for a pregame Saturday, and then edit Coach Ferentz interview. Usually when I leave Coach Ferentz office at 2:00 on Friday afternoon, I'll try and track down the honorary captain. You guys know what that is. That's always a unique thing that Hayden and Kirk have had for 50 years. I talk to the captain. There's always something going on, as you guys know, that honors a former player, whether it's A&F. There's so many subject matters to address and get on the air throughout the year. That's what makes Iowa football so doggone much fun. But usually by 2:30 on Friday afternoon, I'm walking across the parking lot to the press box. My engineer and producer and my spotter, we meet, we hook up there. And for the next 4 hours, we produce the pregame show. We put it all together. I never used to do that, but now you can put it all on your laptop. You can put 10 hours of content in your laptop and have it all sequentially ready to go the next day. When back in the day, you would typically do it live. Once the pregame starts, it's already pre-recorded and pre-produced, and I've got time to visit with the opposing radio play-by-play, because it's a pretty close-knit community among Big Ten play-by-play. Most of the voices do basketball and football as well. I see these guys a lot during the year, and we've developed great friendships. And that's where I get a lot of my insight, quite honestly, because they didn't hear it from me, but this Wisconsin Badger may not play today. And so by the time we go on live, I'm hearing from my sources that it doesn't always come from the opposing play analysts, but usually the analyst is a former great player at that school, and they'll open up and let you know what they think. So even though you're not quoting them, you've got a pretty good feel for how the Badgers offensive line has been playing. other than what you've seen on tape, or you have a real honest assessment of how good Minnesota's defense is this year and who their stud defenders are. And oftentimes I glean that from the opposing radio crew, and they're not giving anything away. Usually it's hard to hide injuries anymore because they have to come out with an injury report. But it's just difficult to hide secrets where it pertains to on the field performance. So that's basically my week right up until kickoff, and away we go. That's my favorite part of the week because I tell kids journalism classes all the time. When I walk into the booth on game day Saturday, I've got a file about that thick with material that I put together all week long on the series, on how the opposing team has done for the last decade. Ohio State, I've got all these quips and quotes and stats and figures. And once the game starts, it goes in a totally opposite direction. And I might get 10% of that thick file on the air or refer to it. But it's comfortable knowing that you've got that to fall back on. If it's a butt kicking or it's a lopsided game or you want to get stat happy or historical happy and throw stuff out. I tell journalism classes all the time, be prepared. Don't just walk in there thinking it's going to go the way it's predicted to go. I mentioned the 0-11 season when we started our show tonight. I had a Hall of Fame mentor in Dubuque radio who hired me in 1971. His name was Red McAleese, and he was a great sportscaster. He formed the old Tall Corn Network back in the 50s, did Iowa football for a long time. Red was an all Big Ten pitcher at Northwestern in the 1920s. So this guy had been around the block. He always chewed on an unlit cigar with his headset on. And he was a great play guy, but he was as humorous as they came. He looked like a W.C. Fields. And I remember Red telling me one time, son, let me tell you something. I give you one piece of advice is you better have a sense of humor in the broadcast booth because there's going to be days you get your ass kicked. And when you're getting your ass kicked, you better have a way to keep the audience engaged. And I've never forgotten that. And of course, with Podolak, how can you not have that thread of humor throughout the broadcast? Podolak has some of the great one-liners of all time. And he derived that through growing up on the farm and being a Hall of Famer with the Kansas City Chiefs and winning the Super Bowl. And Bobby Hansen the same way. Played 10 years with John Stockton and Karl Malone, and then went to Chicago and won a world championship with the Bulls and Michael and Scotty. And I've been blessed with great mentors, with great analysts, and it's helped form my personality. I've been in this business for 52 years now, and it really doesn't change. I love live radio. The neat thing about being a play-by-play person is that you have no idea what's coming. You've got to describe it as it happens. Gallery whiffed on a punt. Nobody ever expected that, but okay, he's human. He'll never do it again. But the bottom line is, and I'm kidding, play-by-play. The wind was blowing hard that day.
Yeah, Iowa State in 93. Let's not talk about that.
You've never whiffed on one. Maybe at Penn State it got a little difficult though up in the mountains, but play-by-play personality, his or her job is to follow the ball, tell you what happened. Don't try and deviate from that until the play is over. A Podolak or a Bobby Hansen, they tell you why it happened because they've worn the uniform at that level. I'm smart enough to know that they can analyze much better. I'll tell you what happened, the down and distance and what Caleb Johnson gained on that last running play or what that quick out on 2nd and 7 got the Hawkeyes. Then I get it right to the analyst and they tell you why it happened because Jennings Dunker waylaid the linebacker, the outside linebacker on a block, and that freed him up for the first down. And to me, that's the way it should work. Don't try to outthink yourself or outfancy yourself. Just describe the play-by-play the way it is. Point A to point B, get your analyst on. They're the superstar. They'll tell you why it happened. And you got 20 seconds to do that before he needs to get it back to you as they're breaking huddle and going to the next play. And we do that for 3.5 hours.
That's amazing. You mentioned journalism students, and I want to give you a chance to talk about your foundation and your scholarship, which is a wonderful thing and shows the type of person you are and the dedication to your craft. So please talk about that for a bit.
Sure. Thank you for bringing it up. Probably around 1990, I was in television. I went to banking full time because TV just wasn't paying enough to support a family and buy a house. And so I got into banking. And for 32 years, I was full time and a part time banker when the Iowa job came along. And banking afforded me a view of the world that I had never seen before. And I think makes my broadcasting career more pronounced, more reformed, or come full circle. Because when you're on the air, you have to know what's going on in the world. You guys know that. It's a lot more than just sports. It's Ukraine and Crimea. It's President Trump. You just have to know what's going on in the world. Banking forces you to do that. You're looking at the stock market all the time. The world revolves around the financial industry, financial services industry. And that refined my broadcasting career. But it was maybe my last 2 or 3 years in banking before the Iowa job came along, right before the Iowa job came along. I got thinking to myself, okay, I went from broadcasting to business, banking, radio to TV to business or banking, back to radio. What's left in my career? What am I going to do with the rest of my career, rest of my life, or rest of my career primarily? And out of that, I had read about other journalism foundations, whether it's Fox or some of the smaller networks or some of the individuals. I thought that would really be neat. It'd be personally, for me, a feel good situation if I could help pay, because tuition has not gone down since I came out of college in the 70s. It's only gone up, and it doesn't look like it's going to go the other way for quite some time. It's expensive to go to college. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could help fund a journalism student, or at least a journalism component, for a year or two or all 4 years? And so that was the genesis of what we have. And it was very gratifying when we had the scholarship fundraising dinner. It was a year in June that we had the dinner. We raised $175,000. We sold tables for $5,000, 8 to a table. And I told my committee, I said, we're not going to sell tables for $5,000. We were limited by space, but 25 tables sold out in 3 days. We never even advertised it. And that told me, okay, somebody out there likes me or likes my work. And that was very gratifying. I got to tell you, I cried a time or two over that. I've never done this before. And I thought, if I could give away $1,000 or $1,200 a year for 10 or 15 years, that'd be terrific. Now we got 175 grand drawing 7% interest. So we're going to be able to fund this thing. So what we've decided to do, and it's funny you bring that up, Nick, because we're having our first giveaway meeting here in a few days. We've decided to do $2,500 and give away 2 scholarships. Not necessarily 2 males or 2 females, but we're going to try and go 1 female, 1 male, because the industry has changed so much. All right, how do we define journalism? Is it podcasts inclusive? Is it a guy that does his own streaming service? There's probably 15 or 20 different ways you can get into journalism. So as long as there's a journalism component there, and it could be a marketing degree, maybe you run a marketing department, a public relations department for a major corporation or a company, that qualifies, because that's a journalism component. When I grew up, it was radio, TV, and newspaper, and now it's so much more than that. So I've got a great committee, a couple of gentlemen who run the local newspaper here, the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald, which is the oldest newspaper in the state of Iowa. It's been around 160, 170 years. It's a daily newspaper. I've got 2 gentlemen from that newspaper that are helping me form the criteria. We've got the criteria in place, and a couple of other local business people who are terrific. And so we'll have an address out there in the coming weeks to where the students can go online and fill out the application, and they don't have to come to Dubuque for an interview. When we get down to maybe 4 or 5 finalists, we will do a Zoom cast and get to know these young people better. And full truth be known, full confession, Iowa State students qualify. I say that tongue in cheek. That was the first question I got. What about kids that go to Iowa State? No, they qualify. I'm not going to jump into that frickin' hornet's nest. We're going to let Iowa State students, UNI students, Wartburg to Iowa Central Community College, everybody qualifies as long as there's a journalism component to it. So it's very gratifying. I'm very humbled by the response, primarily from the Dubuque area that helped me raise all this money. I had some great friends in Des Moines, some in Sioux City and Council Bluff who wrote out checks. And they can, anybody who wants to help the journalism scholarship can help with a check. As long as there's money in the account, we're going to keep giving it away. And probably till I'm well gone, I'm looking forward to, in my semi-retirement years, to hopefully brightening the lives. And what I like about it, it was a great nugget that somebody brought up, because originally it was going to be high school seniors. Okay, they're going into college. And a buddy of mine called me and said, what about somebody who's a sophomore in college who is majoring in journalism? I go, why not? We know they're going to stick with it for the full 4 years. And that will be a component we will emphasize with our kids coming out of high school, that we want you to stay with it 4 years. I want to see that journalism degree. I don't want to see you switching to veterinary medicine halfway through. East Buchanan went down at the state tournament today, unfortunately, but that was one of the great things for me back in the gallery era. And whether it's Hurley or gallery, I love meeting mom and dad, love meeting the parents, not only in Iowa City, but especially on road trips and in particular bowl trips. So much fun. We still have that tradition where at the bowl game, we have a segment at the I Club get together, and we have all the parents come up on stage, parents of the players, and I go right down the line. Many of them I know, some I don't know, and I try to be honest. Okay, who do we have here? The fans. And we had 2,500 jammed into this place in Nashville a couple of years ago for the Music City Bowl, but we've had 10,000 in Phoenix and in Tampa, as you guys have experienced that. But the fans love to see who the parents of the players are. It's a great kick. We still do that. And again, that's, I don't know if it's unique to Iowa, but that doesn't happen everywhere.
Yeah, that is a nice thing. My parents talk about all the people they've met over the years, and they would sort of race the guys with the trucks, Mike Reagan and those guys, Ed Huff back in the day, rest his soul. They were like, yeah, they'd be like, oh, we met him on 80, or we were going here to do this and that. But yeah, it's crazy. Such a fun part of the experience in the program. Yeah, great.
For sure.
Thank you for walking through the scholarship thing. That's great. Great thing you're doing, and wanted to draw some attention.
Thank you.
Let's rewind a little bit back to the play-by-play. How much do you talk to your co-star before the game? You had a long time career with Ed Podolak, and then Pat Anger came on recently, and we don't get all the games out here. So I went on YouTube and I was watching you guys interact, the whole video of watching you during the game. I was like, this is interesting. You got the binoculars and you're talking away, and then all of a sudden you tap him and then he says something, and it goes like throwing it back and forth. Yeah. Talk about some of that. I thought that was a really interesting take.
First off, the tapping on the shoulder, I'm a stickler for not stepping on guys while they're talking. And I certainly don't want them. Podolak was the exception. He'd done the Iowa games for 40 years. And Ed, at the end of his career, it was Ed's show. If he wanted to walk on me while I'm talking, that's fine. And what I loved about Ed is he could grunt and spit and hack his way through a call every now and then. And the audience loves it because it's Ed Podolak. There aren't many guys, Nick, that have their number and name on the inner ring of Chiefs Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City. So you cut Ed some slack. And Anger, personality-wise, is very similar. Blue collar, down in the dirt kind of guy. Ed happened to be offensive special teams, and Anger was one of the hardest hitting middle linebackers ever to come through the University of Iowa. So I think, to me, personality is really important. And I keep forgetting we're on YouTube, the full confession here, to be honest. So I got to remind myself that some of the hand gestures that we used to throw at each other in the booth, you can't get away with that now. You can't be flipping somebody off or worse on game day. And so I have my spotters right to my left. I got Anger on my right, me. I've got a spotter and a producer on my left, and then an engineer behind me. And I tell them all, every now and then remind me, point to the camera that's just outside the press box window. I mean, I've only been suspended twice so far in my career. I don't want a third time, but it's all in fun. And it's amazing to me the response that the YouTube broadcast has brought, that people will actually watch the broadcast while they're listening to it or watching the game on TV. But that's multimedia. So we have a lot of fun with it. Every now and then Anger will crack a comment. Hi there in Cresco or out in Sioux City or Odebolt, Arthur, the home of Cooper DeJean. We have a lot of fun with it. And on that note, we have great sponsors that have been with the Iowa Hawkeye Radio Network forever. And we couldn't do it, of course, without their support. But the actual game day, I think I get back to what Red McAleese told me. You better have a sense of humor because there's going to be days when you're getting waxed. And you guys know that as a player in the big, no fun to get your butt whipped. Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often at Iowa. But when it does, you can't run off the field till the clock says zeros. You got to fight it to the end and make the best of it and then move on. And so that's what we try to do on the bad days. But most of the time, the Hawks have the lead or they're going to get the win. And it really adds a lot of authenticity to the broadcast. And if it's a lopsided game and Iowa's in front, fourth quarter, that's where Anger usually gets a little sideways. He'll start in with his one-liners, and he has got some beauties. And you guys watched him as a player. His personality is perfect for a middle linebacker. He'll let you know what he's thinking. He doesn't care who he offends. And to a certain degree, and we've had that conversation a lot. Of course, he's only been through 1 year, but I thought he was remarkable. He was phenomenal last year for never having done this. Never had a headset on in his life. When Podolak came to Iowa, Jim Zabel said, "Hey, Ed, you want to do the Iowa games with me?" Ed had done 3 or 4 years after he retired from the NFL. He had done 3 or 4 years on NBC television out on the East Coast. And he always said every week, buddy boy, they'd have me doing the Jets or the Miami Dolphins or New England. I hated those teams. I didn't know anybody in those teams. I wanted to get back to the Midwest. But it gave him a really good groundbreaking of play-by-play and being an analyst. So when he came back to Iowa, Ed was a polished veteran. And 1983 was his first year with Jim Zabel. And he did the games on WHO with Z for 14 years. And then I came along in 1997. And really what helped me, I go back to when I commented about getting to know these guys socially back in the 70s when I was doing the games at a little old radio station out of Dubuque. And they were all great to me then. And we developed some great relationships and friendships. So when Ed and I hit the ground running in 97, it was like we'd been together for a while. And so I feel I've had the best of both worlds with Podolak and Anger. And I was one of 4 or 5 people that decided on who was going to replace Ed when he retired.
Hello, and welcome to our wonderful University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital. This beautiful building, which opened to patients in the early months of 2017, has provided children with the ideal healing environment to match our world-class system of healthcare. We are Iowa's only comprehensive children's hospital, meaning we offer every pediatric subspecialty. We have the UI Stead Family Children's Hospital Press Box, a special viewing space with the city's best view of Kinnick Stadium. Many children and their families have caught a Hawkeye football game from this spot and taken part in the other side of Iowa's greatest tradition, the wave. The ultimate gesture of care and compassion, and the next time you're looking up at our windows, please give a wave.
And I was adamant. It wasn't that we wouldn't take somebody from offense or special teams, but what Phil Parker has done with the Iowa defense over 25 years, I was just adamant about the next analyst needs to come from the defensive side of the football because the Hawks have been so good defensively, even historically through the Hayden Fry years, as well as Phil Parker and Kirk Ferentz. And so I was one of 4 or 5 votes on the committee, and Pat, he wasn't unanimous, but he was certainly a solid number 1. And now we had to start the process of, okay, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. And we're all going to slip up, but please, no F-bombs on the air. We're all going to get a loose word out there every now and then, but just keep it above board, because we've got sixth graders listening. We've got senior citizens checking in from the nursing home. And although we don't want to offend anybody, we know we're going to offend somebody at some point, but let's do it professionally. And Pat he's bought in. He's just a real joy and a treat to be around. And he and Podolak, and you guys, Nick and Brian, will appreciate this. I've never been without binoculars, because it's my job to follow the football. Now, if it's fumbled or batted around, I'm going to lose it, try and pick it back up on occasion. But that's why I have a spotter and a stat man to help a producer let me know what happened. Whether it's a deflected pass, you'll see this every now and then, or who recovered the fumble, and they're pointing to the numbers. It's an absolute 5 o'clock traffic jam once the game starts, especially if it's a close game and it's back and forth. But Podolak never, ever used binoculars. Now, in the new Kinnick Stadium, we're 8 stories up and about 100 feet further back than we were back in the 70s and 80s. So we're a ways from the field. We're right on the 50. We got a great seat, don't get me wrong. But if it's a night game and the lights are on, it's still a little difficult to see everything that's going on. Podolak never used binoculars. Anger rarely used binoculars. And they both had the same answer. I want to see what the defense is doing. I pretty well know what the Iowa offense is going to do. I want to see what the opposing defense is doing, especially Podolak, because he was a great running back. So he said, I don't want anything impeding my eyes. He said, I'm looking at those linebackers and that safety sneaking up and coming downhill. And that's how they made their counter moves. So that's what made Podolak the absolute best in the industry at describing why it happened. And Anger is pretty close to Podolak. So Pat's only going to get better.
He has done a great job. Yeah, that's what I wanted to watch, because I was like, wow, this has got to be a real switch for him to do this and get into that mind frame of trying to call the game in that. So yeah, he's done great. We had him on as a guest earlier in the year, which was great. It was super entertaining and classic Hawkeye. Love the guy and just bleeds black and gold. It's amazing. So good to see him enjoying it and having a good time with it.
Indeed. By the way, you had asked how often do I talk with the guys during the week. Pody, I'd talk maybe twice a week. Usually when he's listening to Kirk's show, he would call me the next morning and say, hey, you were talking last night about what did Kirk say about this, or what did Kirk say about that? Pat's the same way. They stay engaged throughout the week. Their job is a little bit less hectic than mine, in that I need to know names and numbers for the play-by-play piece, the identification piece. They're basically analyzing the play as it happens. Now, they watch film from Tuesday or Monday on of the opponent, as well as our own film. They watch more film than I do, but they have a great feel for the opponent coming in on game day. And obviously, they walk the walk and they talk the talk. They know the football jargon. And so they understand everything that's going on down on the field. They help me a ton. And there's nobody better than Podolak. You can't do it for 40 years and not be highly respected in the industry. And every time an opposing team would come to Kinnick Stadium, Matt Millen might be the best example I can give you. Matt Millen, who was his final linebacker at Penn State and then with the Raiders for a number of years. Millen would always pound on the door and come charging through there and give Pody a bear hug. And they'd sit in the back of the booth and just talk football for half an hour, 45 minutes. Millen had already been in town since Thursday night or Friday morning over at the football complex, doing nothing but watching tape. And that's why I have so much respect for the guys that not only play the game at the highest level, but there's a reason they're an excellent analyst. And Matt Millen, he just happened to be the GM of the Detroit Lions before he was let go there. So he's seen it from all different angles. And Podolak has so many contacts in the National Football League as well as around college football. Jack Ham, the Hall of Fame linebacker, is the analyst for the Penn State games. Like I said, every place you go in the Big Ten, there's a former great from that school. And so it's fun to listen to Anger or Podolak and their analysts get together, and I'm taking notes while I'm listening to them, which helps me in the broadcast, at least from the opponent perspective. for 3.5, 4 hours on game day. Yeah, we're a couple of dish rags guys when we add in an hour and a half post game show on top of a 3.5, 4 hour football game and a 2 hour pregame show. I'm ready for an ice cold beverage when we walk out of Kinnick Stadium on Saturday night.
I can imagine. That's a lot of focus. I'm sure there's a ton of institutional knowledge that you're around and can absorb with all these guys. Is there a favorite, other than maybe Kinnick, other stadium that you've been at that you were like, okay, I love that place, love the story, the background behind it, or any of those things?
Oh, absolutely. I'd start, obviously, Kinnick's my favorite. And you guys have been back since they built it, filled in that north end zone and built that Pacia Center up 7 or 8 stories. And Ferentz loves it because, especially if the opponent is driving to the north end zone, it is as loud as any stadium in America. It really is. And it seats 70,000. But the old caveat is you are right on top of the field at Kinnick Stadium. When they built was Iowa Stadium then in 1928, Iowa was one of the few universities that didn't outline the football field with a 6 or an 8 lane track. You look at a lot of the old stadiums, they all have them. Just a budget crunch, cost cutting mechanism. Iowa didn't do that. Why? I don't know. But man, you're, Nick and Brian, you're 20 feet from the opposing sideline when you're on the other side of the stadium or the Hawkeye sideline. And I remember Norm Parker, who, God rest his soul, Norm Parker is one of the great characters of all time. He used to tell me I'd come in here on Saturday, and George Perlis was the head coach at Michigan State. He said and Norm was the defensive coordinator and the linebacker coach, and obviously a great D coordinator at Iowa for many years. He said we'd come in here on game day and get in a close game, and we had a lot of them with Iowa. He said I'm still cringing about the Chuck Long bootleg, the fake give to Ronnie Harmon, and he rolls around right in, and our corner or safety got sucked up into the line of scrimmage. But he said I'd have everything spilled on me, and I'd turn around, I'd look about 25 rows up on the visiting sideline, and I'd see all these drunk farmers in orange deer hunting outfits. And Norm says, yeah, we're in Iowa City. Some of them be wearing antlers. You can't make that up. And you're getting that from an opposing defensive coordinator and one of the best in college football. And Michigan State wasn't far removed from a Rose Bowl win that year. And Norm said, and that's why when he came to Iowa, he said, that's why one of the reasons I came to Iowa is I knew we'd have the home field advantage without question. So Kinnick Stadium aside, I got to start with a horseshoe in Columbus because pregame, when they do that script Ohio and the tuba player dots the I, there's nothing like that anywhere in college football. But the stadium, long before they renovated it, Iowa spent $90 million to renovate Kinnick in the early 2000s. Ohio State spent over $300 million to renovate the horseshoe. They just do things they got a little bigger budget in Columbus than we do in Iowa City, but they kept the cantilevered stadium. So you got 95,000, 105,000, whatever it is, all screaming at the same time. And that crescendo goes straight up, hits the undercarriage of that third tier, and comes cascading back down on you. It is unbelievable. If you've not been to a football game in the horseshoe, that should be on your bucket list because it really is amazing. You go to Ann Arbor and you've got the big cereal bowl that seats 100 and whatever, 10,000 people, but half of it's built into the ground. So you don't have a ton of brick and mortar sticking out of the ground at the big house. So a lot of that noise goes up and just out both ends. It's level all the way around. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's still awfully loud in Ann Arbor. You guys know, you've been there. But I'd have to rate the horseshoe of opponent stadiums number one. Camp Randall would be a pretty close second. They can get 80, 90,000 people jammed into that place up in Madison. It's another one of those Roaring 20s stadiums like Ann Arbor, but it's decked, it's tiered. They've got suites all the way around it now. It's louder. And when the student body does jump around at the end of the third quarter, you're holding on to the rails in the press box. The whole thing's shaking. We thought one year when Barry really had it going up there, that press box was going to fall flat on its face. Thankfully, it didn't. Camp Randall will be number 2. Penn State, that Tonka toy erector set layout that Beaver Stadium is, it's all metal, and they're doing a lot of remodeling on that right now. It's cavernous, it's deep, it's loud, but it's loud because they can get 115,000 people in there. But it is noisy. But I'd have to rank Ohio State, Camp Randall 1, 2, and no, Nebraska fans, I haven't forgotten about you with your 450 consecutive sellouts. Memorial Stadium in Lincoln is precious. It really is. It's a historical venue. It's a fan crazed neighborhood out there in Lincoln. They really support the Huskers through thick and thin. There's been a lot of thin here in the last decade or so, but I really like Matt Rule as a coach, and he's building the foundation. He's got a heck of a quarterback in Dominic Raiola. And again, the expectations are always high at Nebraska. So the fans are always going to come out and support them. But those would be, outside of Kinnick, those would be 3 of my favorites. Are they the loudest? In my opinion, they are. But big picture, there's a reason the Big Ten is the oldest conference in America and therefore the most prestigious, with all due respect to the SEC. And a lot of it has to do with those stadiums that are 50, 75, over 100 years old. Opened in 1929. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of Kinnick Stadium. So they're all special, whether it's Purdue or even old Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, Indiana, which is really hopping now because of what Kirk did last year, had the Hoosiers in the playoffs. That's Iowa's homecoming game this year. It's a great schedule. I know we'll get to that, but yeah, it's hard to pick one stadium, but there's no doubt I would put the Horseshoe up here, Camp Randall, Memorial Stadium on the next level.
Yeah, I probably agree with that too. It's funny how Michigan is so packed with people, but it's not near as loud. It's like the sound goes up kind of thing. It's funny, each of those stadiums have their own kind of quirks to them too. I remember like Michigan State back in the day, I think they were throwing like the pizza boxes from like the personal pan pizzas, and it's just, they take on lives of their own to some degree that way. So it's,
Yep. I think Domino's is from Detroit, if I'm not mistaken. So that's probably why they're throwing pizza boxes. But yeah, they all have their own flair and flavor. Minneapolis, the Gophers, that new stadium is absolutely state of the art compared to the old Memorial Stadium in the Twin Cities. But Purdue has got a great old stadium. The Boilermakers have been down, but their fans still come out, 40, 50,000 for every home game. And I don't want to leave Rutgers and Maryland and obviously the West Coast schools. I'm still having a difficult time realizing that they're in the Big Ten. Rutgers and Maryland have been around, 10 years now, but the Big Ten has really stretched out to an intercontinental conference now, East Coast, West Coast. I remember last season, or maybe it was, we were at Maryland for football. I had a bye week, and then we went to UCLA. Talk about covering all the flyover states in 2 weeks' time. But that is the Big Ten. That is college football these days. It's consolidated. It's merged down to these Power Four conferences, and television has become such a factor in how we play, when we play, who we play weekly. And you and I remember the days where you played at 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, and that was pretty much it. Now you can play any day of the week, and we're getting to that point.
yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the new conference and the NIL if you want. Keep going on that part.
The new conference, never in my wildest dreams when I came on board 28 years ago, did I think that we would have the setup we have today. People smarter than I may have envisioned that, but TV was big in 1997, but sports TV, nothing like it is now. We had ESPN, and now we've got a half a dozen televising networks, and really TV has driven it all, and rightfully they've got the big bucks. And so now we're at a point where after conference expansion, we've got 18 schools. who's paying the most? It's Fox, and it's CBS, and it's NBC. It's the big three there. CBS has gone to the SEC, but Fox or NBC or ABC, those are the top three. So they'll usually rotate on what game they feel is most important to their viewing audience for that week. And then it'll be number two and then number three. Then we get to FS, then we get to ESPN, then we get to the Big Ten Network. So we've got a half a dozen televising networks that all have a seat at the table and want a piece of the pie. And they're all paying commensurately for rights fees. And so the millions upon billions of dollars coming into the conferences, that's the reason every Power Four school gets a check for $20.5 million to distribute to their athletes present day. And rightfully so, because they are the product, whether it's football or basketball or wrestling. And it's divvied up. Football will get the biggest share of the revenue pie because we have more scholarship players in football than any other sport. And then you get to basketball and wrestling and the other sports. But it is incredible to think that I grew up watching the great players of USC and UCLA winning Heisman trophies seemingly every other year, thinking, man, they really play great football out there on the West Coast. Oregon and Washington came along, and that's not slight Stanford. And the Pac-12 to me was always one of the great leagues in America. And I'd get home at night from Iowa City and I'd flip on USC playing Notre Dame or whatever the great matchup of the evening happened to be. And then, of course, prior to that, here comes Rutgers, Maryland. And I can remember Bob Bowlesby telling me when they were down to a number of schools, Missouri was one that was being seriously considered. Obviously, Notre Dame. The door has always been cracked for Notre Dame. Here they sit right in the heart of the Big Ten, but the Irish are doing okay as an independent still to this day. Maybe the day will come when Notre Dame will join the Big Ten, but I wouldn't look for it in the near future. So there was a mixture of schools from different geographical areas, but obviously, and Bowlesby told me then, and we laugh about it now, is that these TV networks, they want eyeballs. They want TV sets. Where more than New York City can you get eyeballs? And here's Rutgers right across the Hudson River. And so it made a pretty logical selection. And then right next door was the University of Maryland, which brings in the Washington, D.C., the Baltimore, Virginia. You draw a 100-mile circle around D.C., and you've got Cleveland to Columbus to all these wonderful football communities. So that was a lot easier selection than the four West Coast schools. Now, obviously, they wanted the LA market, which is a no-brainer with UCLA and USC, two prideful, great tradition institutions. Oregon, Washington was a little bit more difficult. Yeah, you get Seattle, and Eugene's a great town. I've been to Eugene and for basketball games. That was more, what about the institutions? And as you know, there's some academic standards that the Big Ten has that must be met. And of course, all of these schools are great schools academically. So in the end, we bring in the four from the West Coast, the two from the East Coast. And prior to that, we had Penn State and Nebraska enter the fray. Prior to that, it was the Big Ten. Now it's the Big Ten and 8 more. And who knows where it'll stop or where it'll end. But the bottom line is all of these institutions have great athletic tradition. And so the TV ratings are always going to be through the roof, which means more advertising dollars, which means bucks for needed dollars for each institution to keep the headlines. Even there's always going to be that collision between the Big Ten and the SEC, and the bravado and the braggadocio as to who's better. That'll be settled on the field now with this. What are they going to do? 16 teams, I think they want to go to. It was 12 teams last year. They're going to go to 16. That'll be settled on the field. Annually now, we will find out who the best is, or is it somebody from the Big 12, or is it somebody from the ACC? Is it a Clemson? But the last couple of years, it's been the Big Ten, and pretty definitively.
Go ahead, Brian. I've been dominating the conversation, and I realize. You talk about stepping on people. I step on Brian all the time.
Come on, Brian. Join the conversation, Brian.
I'm just sitting back enjoying, yeah. Tell us about the bar you got. When'd you set
Dolph?
that? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. We got a lot of plugs in here for journalism scholarships and Dolph's Iron Bar. It's twofold there, Brian. Across 27 years of doing Iowa, I've been asked 1,000 times to put my name on a bar or a pub, but most of those have come from Iowa City, Des Moines, Coralville, and I like to be a hands-on guy, or at least can I see it from here guy. And it was just impossible living up near Dubuque to be around the bar or the watering establishment at least a couple times a week. Because when I go to Iowa City, I'm usually talking Iowa football or basketball or interviewing coaches. And combine that with the fact that Dubuque is the oldest city in the state. It's one of the great cities anywhere along the Mississippi River. Dubuque's reinvented itself. And 20 years ago, Dubuque has a pretty nasty historical preservation commission. So if you're going to knock a building down in Dubuque and it's over 100 years old, you got to go through the Historical Preservation Commission. So we have all these great old factory buildings called the Millwork District. And back in the day of the riverboat captains and the steamships, Dubuque was the millworking capital of the Midwest, if not the country. Flex Steel Furniture is incorporated in Dubuque. A lot of family-owned companies got their start in Dubuque. So Dubuque was a labor-intensive industrial city. And then as the industrial wave changed here in the last 50 years, factories closed down, moved overseas. And so they were about to knock down. Dubuque's factory district comprises 15 large buildings, right stone's throw, probably for you, Brian, a pitching wedge away from the Mississippi River. For me, it'd be a driver. But the Historical Preservation Commission said, you know what? It occurred at the same time that the city was building a bypass around downtown Dubuque, connected to the new Dubuque, Wisconsin bridge, and you're on your way to Madison without having to stop. But a lot of people like to stop in Dubuque. So they redesigned the bypass because it was going to cut right through the heart of the old Millwork District to save a couple $1 million in concrete paving. And therefore, they would lose 5 or 6 of those buildings. Preservation Commission said, no, let's redraw the plan. And about that time, the governor, the legislature, came up with these wonderful tax credits where if you rehabbed a building, you would get millions of dollars in tax credits back. That really mushroomed Dubuque's development along the riverfront. So the city reinvented itself from a labor-heavy industrial factory town to now tourism. Now they've got 2 casinos on the riverfront. City Island has become a destination place with ballparks and Fighting Saints hockey and all those wonderful things. And oh, by the way, the factory district is still there. So one by one, these buildings have been repurposed. And next year at this time, they'll all be full with residents, with retail, with corporate offices, attorneys, etc. So that's the big picture. The building Dolph's Iron Bar is in was built in the late 1860s, 1870s, called the Ironworks Building. It's an old gear pulley factory for the farmers with their pulleys with the horse-drawn wagons back in the last century. And then when the mechanized industry came into play, this company, Dubuque Ironworks, we call it the Iron because everybody thinks I lift weights for 4 hours every day. That's why we call it the Iron Bar. That couldn't be further from the truth. It was the Dubuque Ironworks building. And so it's 250,000 square feet in this building. And there was a bar that had tried to invent itself 2 or 3 times and just didn't have the proper management and went belly up. So it sat empty for a couple of years. And I got a call one day from the new owners of the building, and they wanted to put my name on this. They wanted to reopen. They're going to call it the Iron Bar. And would I come down and take a look at the footprint? Well, outside the side door connected to the main bar, it looks like an old speakeasy. It's like a throwback, a Chicago bijou saloon type bar. But we have this courtyard that seat about 200 people. And it used to be a lunch break outdoor area for the 250 employees that worked at the old Ironworks company. They wanted a customized big screen. which we have 17 feet by 9 feet, mounted on one of the brick walls. And on Hawkeye football game day, you can't find a seat out there. We put in some Wrigley Field bleachers along the outer walls. We've got picnic tables, bar stools. It'll seat close to 200 people on game day. And so it was their vision. We'll be open 5 years. We opened during COVID. I said, you know what? If people want to wear masks, fine. If they don't, that's fine too. But what better way to break in a new staff, as long as they're not fidgety about it, during COVID? Because we know we're not going to be overrun with people, but we'll be up to snuff. Now, nobody thought COVID would last as long as it did, but we survived, and we'll be open 5 years this October. The first day we opened was the day the Big Ten finally decided to play football. Remember, they were going to cancel the year, then they were going to bring it back, then they were going to cancel again. We can't play 12 games, let's play 8 games. So the first day of our 8-game schedule was the day we opened, and here we are 5 years later. And most bars / restaurants fail in the first year. 80% of them fail in the first year. That's my old banking hat that I'm wearing. We've been around 5 years, and we're finally going to get food. We're built in the middle of the building, so we didn't have the proper hookups for a kitchen. So this year we're going to add food, bar food, to our drink menu. It's a higher end adult beverage place, but on Saturday night, we got 3 colleges in Dubuque. On Saturday night, like after 10 o'clock, the kids will start showing up, those that are 21, of course, and they'll have a great time for an hour and a half or 2 before they cross the river to East Dubuque, which is open until 3:30 in the morning. We have the best of both worlds, but I get in there 2 or 3 times a week. I'm a people person. I love to talk to people, and we get folks coming from Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, Clinton, the Quad Cities, because they've heard about it. And Dubuque's not a long drive really from anywhere in eastern Iowa or east central Iowa. So they'll make the trip up, spend the weekend. And one thing that has really helped is the Field of Dreams, especially this time of year, because Iowa used to be a flyover state for all these U18, U16 teams. Now, the city of Dubuque got 2,500 phone calls last year from ball clubs on both coasts about coming to Iowa because they have to see the Field of Dreams. There are days they get rained out, so what are you going to do? Lay in the hotel or come to Dolph's Iron Bar? So we got video games for the kids, and you can come into the bar if you're a certain age, under 21. You just can't obviously serve alcohol. So we've got the best of both worlds, and we continue to grow it here 5 years later. Thanks for asking about it.
That's great. We'll have to stop in sometime. Just down the road from my house.
I got drink chips, Nick.
And you grew up where? You grew up in Cascade?
I did. I grew up in Cascade, which is not unlike Winthrop, Iowa, maybe a little bit bigger than Winthrop, East Buchanan. But I grew up, Cascade was about 1,200 people when I grew up. And I remember the most amazing thing about, now Dubuque County is predominantly Catholic. When I grew up in Cascade, we had 2 Catholic churches, a town of 1,200 people with 2 Catholic parishes. If you've got that today, you've got a real scoop. And old Highway 151 ran right through the middle of town. And on the south side, we had St. Mary's, which was all German. On the north side of 151, St. Martin's, which was all Irish. And the 2 high schools used to play each other every year in basketball and baseball. And man, was it a knockdown drag out, as they say. But it was a great town, like all farming communities in Iowa, like that. My mom and dad, and dad's parents before them, ran a store long before they called them convenience stores. It was Dolphin's Corner. We had a gravel parking lot, city service gasoline. We sold cold cuts, cold meat, bread, canned goods, candy case, ice cream parlor. Of course, in those days, you couldn't open on Sunday. You couldn't open the bar on Sunday, but we had a bar during the week and a weight scales. So those farmers would come in with their tractors and they'd pull that harvest up on the scales. They'd get their load weighed. And while Dad was moving the scales, they'd come in and have a shot with a beer chaser and then hop back on the tractor and pull it home. You couldn't do that today, but in the 50s and 60s, you could get away with that. And those farmers were big enough they could handle one shot with a little stubby beer chaser. Those are some of the vivid memories I have of I was in charge of stocking the goods on the shelves and pumping gas. Then it wasn't self-service. You go out and wash the windshield and check the oil for the customer. Those were great days. And 7 kids in my family, 4 boys, 3 girls. I'm the oldest of 7. And we grew up in the back of the house, in the back of the bar. That was a house on one side, a bar and grocery store on the other. And my brother and I slept in bunk beds right above the bar. So on Saturday night, we usually didn't get to sleep until 1:30 in the morning because the Legion Hall was right down the street and they hosted a wedding every week. And after the reception was over, they'd all pile up to Dolphin's Corner. And boy, oh boy, I could hear the side door opening up. Dad and his bartenders throwing guys out the side door because they were overserved or too loud on Saturday night. Those are just some of the memories. It'll all be in my book. Great memories of growing up in small town Iowa.
That's amazing. Wow, that sounds familiar. I guess we never really thought about going in the bar to get drinks in between the loads. Driving into town.
Yeah.
I guess the bar was right there. We didn't even think about it.
Honey, I got to go to town and weigh the oats.
Good thing.
Weigh the beans and the corn. I'll be back in 25 minutes. Yeah, no, those were different times now. And law enforcement was a little more forgiving then. But this is 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the harvest was underway. And on those hardworking farmers, how big and thirsty they can get. And they come in and play pinochle on the bar. And when you play pinochle, I guess it's the harder you slam your fist on the bar, the more the chips bounce or the coins bounce. And so those are great memories. I got vivid memories of those days. And that's all part of growing up in Iowa.
For sure. Small town like that, Dad had known before we got our first drink in. that news travels fast. They'd be like, "Oh, your kids are having a beer down here."
Yeah. Is your son 21?
Belly up right now. You probably should come in.
Yeah. Another big thing is we sold the Des Moines Register, the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald. These people would come in and they'd buy all 3 newspapers to go with their groceries. And on a Sunday afternoon, everybody was out picnicking. They're going out to the campground or they're going to the park to roast hot dogs and hamburgers. And we were the only place open on Sunday. It was an absolute John F. Kennedy Expressway on Sunday morning. Mass or church would get out and these people would just flood into the store to get their newspapers. But I always wondered, what are you reading in the Cedar Rapids Gazette that you're not reading in the Register or the Dubuque paper? And papers, I think, were 50 cents then, but I could never figure that one out. But great memories, great times.
That's an amazing walk down memory lane. Thanks for taking us there.
Oh, you bet. I just want to thank you guys for serving your time in a great university like the University of Iowa and giving us fans all the great thrills that you and Brion gave us. And I say that because special teams to this day still as equally important as any offensive set or linebacker blitz. And LeVar Woods wouldn't have it any other way. And you guys know his personality. And the proof's in the pudding. We've got an All-American kicker. We've got a freshman All-American punter back in Reese Dakin. He's a Torrey Taylor clone. He's not Torrey yet, but he's getting close. And of course, Drew Stevens, I don't know how many games he's won with his big toe, but it's a handful. LeVar does such a great job with the special teams, and defense is defense. We've got some holes to fill. From Jack Campbell to Jay Higgins, okay, who's going to step up now? The Jadens are going to get the first crack at it. Montgomery is a legacy player. Jerry Montgomery's son, Jaden, is all football. Jaden Harrell out of Urbandale is very academically charged when it comes to football. Not that Montgomery isn't, but Jaden's more a thinking man's middle linebacker. Jackson Rexroth, the kid out of Cedar Rapids, Xavier, is going to jump in and try and fill the shoes of Sebastian Castro. And then on the weak side, we've got a variety of guys that will jump in there. The 3 redshirt freshmen, I'll give you 3 names: Preston Reese, Cam Buffington, and Derek Montross. Those 3 were recruited for a reason. They're all Iowa kids. They're tough, multiple sport kids from wrestling to shot put. They're all up around 230, 235, 240. And Seth Wallace, he's got an itchy trigger finger. If the guys that are the designated starters aren't getting it done, then those three redshirt freshmen are going to be in there. I'm missing a name here I want to give you that I apologize that is going to start on the outside. Oh, Carson Shire. How could I forget him? If there is a starter back from last year, it's Carson. He started a number of games. Solid kid from up Iowa Falls way. Carson will be in the mix too. So they've got options at linebacker, but I don't know that there's been this big a void in terms of star quality. It doesn't get any better than Jack Campbell and Jay Higgins. But Higgins waited his turn when Jack was there. And now the Heralds, one's a junior, one's a senior, they've waited their turn. Now it's here. Carson Shire knows the lay of the landscape, so he'll be fine. Rexroth was a head hunting safety a year ago. He's 6'4", 230 pounds, so he's grown into that linebacker body. The other concern would be a defensive tackle. Aaron Graves is an All-American in waiting. He had a great year last year at 6'4", 300 academic All-American. He'll be solid at that D tackle. Next to him, it's anybody's guess. I was looking at the roster today, guys, and they brought in a couple of really good quality transfer portal kids. Bryce Hawthorne is a name I'll give you. He's out of Minnesota, but he played at South Dakota State with Mark Gronowski. So he's quality. They've got a couple of other guys that will get along. Jeremiah Pittman has been hanging around for a couple of years now. He's a senior from Chicago. Jeremiah, I like Kenneth Merriweather, who's been shown flashes of greatness on special teams. He's lanky at 255 pounds, so that he can play inside and outside because of his speed. There's some guys, as you guys know, they're always walk-ons that have turned into really good football players. Will Hubert is out of Omaha. He's 290. He's going to get a shot at D tackle, and there are others. The saving grace are the defensive ends, Ethan Hurkett and Max Llewellyn. They are quality. They're all Big Ten caliber. Llewellyn knocked the ball out from behind on Raiola with less than a minute to go last November and set up Stevens' game-winning field goal. Llewellyn is a turnover machine. Not only does he get to the quarterback, he knocks the ball loose. And Max is just an absolute Mad Max from the Des Moines area. So Hurkett and Llewellyn will carry the load along with Graves inside. On the back end, Phil's probably had a couple sleepless nights because he's a worrywart, number one. But he's moved Xavier Wampa to Quinn Schulte's vacancy at free safety. They've got two war-tested corners, Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall. They've played a lot the first 2 years. And now they're turned to step up and get it done at corner. And that's an important position, obviously. They've got options. And as we've learned over time, the Iowa defense has always risen to the occasion. And they got to do it in a plus turnover ratio. They were plus 12 in turnovers last year. That's the Iowa way. Not only do they tackle well, but they take the ball away. Offensively, we got one of the best offensive lines in the Big Ten returning. We lost a couple guys, but Logan Jones back at center, Jennings Dunker at right tackle. Pro Football Focus has those two guys rated the top seniors coming back at their position. Logan Jones, is he Tyler Linderbaum? Maybe not, but he's pretty close. And Logan could have come out this year, decided to come back. Dunker's outstanding at the right tackle. Left tackle, they're battling it out between a junior, Jack Dotzler, who is the tested one. He's been there, but I'll give you a name, Trevor Lauck, L-A-U-C-K, a kid out of Indianapolis. He is a mongrel. He'll knock you into next week, and I know that's what they're hoping for. Bo Stevens is back at the other guard. And Cade Pieper might be the newcomer that you see. He's a kid out of Omaha. I believe it's Omaha. He's from Nebraska. But he is a man-child. He is, as you guys know, the offensive line is never really an issue at Iowa. As long as they can keep them healthy, they've always recruited quality. Got 5 tailbacks led by Kamari Moulton. It's the deepest receiving room that I can remember. They've got a transfer, Sam Phillips, out of Chattanooga, had 55 catches a year ago. Jacob Gill is back for his last year, the Northwestern transfer. who really flashed last year. We got to keep this kid from Rock Rapids, Rock Valley. I always get that screwed up. I'll hear from Reese Vandersea, is 6'4". He'll be a sophomore. He had a great spring. He made 2 back shoulder catches in the spring game. I went, whoa. I'm standing next to Dave Croston, who was an All-American left tackle at Iowa back in the Hayden Fry days. And he goes, Dolph, who's that kid? I go, he was really ascending last year when he got hurt, missed a half a dozen games. He's back healthy. Dalton Howard is a 6'4" stud. I think he's a sophomore. And Cajun Weegan, as Ed Podolak used to call him, Caden Weegan from Williamsburg, the special teams player of the year in college football. That's at least kick returner, punt and kick returner, as you guys watched him. He's a jitterbug, man. He can fly. They're going to throw him out there at the slot receiver position. So they've really got some quality. And of course, obviously, the X factor is Mark Gronowski. I'm telling you, this kid, I watched him at South Dakota State. He was the freshman quarterback the year that Jack Campbell forced a couple safeties and we kicked a field goal and beat South Dakota State 7-3 in the opener at Kinnick on a Saturday night. South Dakota State went on to win the national championship that year. Gronowski has led him to back titles. Maybe not his freshman year, but the next year, his junior year, they won national championships. He's a Walter Payton winner, the equivalent of the Heisman at the FCS level. Kid's 6'3", 230 pounds. He scored 133 touchdowns. He's thrown for over 10,000 yards. And frankly, what he is the quarterback for Tim Lester's offense. And Tim's got his quarterback. He's got 2 of them, actually. The kid from Auburn who transferred in, Hank Brown, he'll be a sophomore, redshirt sophomore. He's long and lanky. He's got a great gun. But this is Gronowski's team. He's a one and done. He's getting the big bucks to come in and take the Iowa offense to a level that we've only been dreaming about since Nate Stanley left town 5-6 years ago. I can still visualize Nate throwing 5 touchdown passes in the Holiday Bowl against Southern Cal. And although we've had good quarterbacks, they've either been beat up or our O-line's been beat up. And you guys know better than I, you've got to have that offensive line, the running backs, and the quarterback all on the same wavelength. And as usual, I've saved the best for last. It's still tight end you, Nick. Addison Ostringa should have a knockout year. He was an understudy to Sam Laporta for a couple of years. Now, Addison's got to stay healthy. He's missed some significant time with injuries the last couple of years, but he had a great spring. And the Hawks are a little bit thin. I know that's hard to believe at tight end. They've got a sophomore and a redshirt freshman that they're bringing along, but the early bolt for the NFL has caught up with the Hawks at that position, but they still have 3 or 4 quality kids at the tight end position. Ostringa, you know about. The other names you've never heard of, but you will, as you usually do with Iowa. Running back, Kamari Moulton, Jazz Patterson, Ty Washington, who's the fastest kid on the team. They brought him in from receiver, and they're going to throw him out there at running back. Runs a 4.35 40. They had him. He was the guy you saw in the jet sweeps or the quick reverses a year ago. So this offense has got some great possibilities. And if the defense comes along like I know it will, special teams will be terrific, especially with the punter, the kicker, and Weegan returning punts and kicks. The offense should be markedly improved. It could be another wonderful year, and it needs to be, because that schedule is a knockout schedule.
Yeah, no, it sounds like there's a lot of great guys and excited to get this year going. Yeah, LeVar's done a great job with the special teams, but I'm humbled to be just part of that conversation of being in the program. And the guys today are so talented and like fun to watch, and really watching it hit on all cylinders. It's been great to see LeVar have success as a player and then as a coach. So yeah, it's a lot of great things, a lot of great future ahead for the Hawks.
LeVar is so down to earth, but not only was he a terrific player, he played some tight end, he played some linebacker, and then moved on to the NFL, where he played, I think, 7 years. But he played special teams. He's been there. He's walked the walk. And he is so unique in the way he game plans on special teams. And he's the first guy on the field on game day, home or away. And he's got his little wind monitor. Every 10 yards he walks, he sticks that wind meter up in the air and he registers what's the wind. Now, this is 2 hours before kickoff. I'm thinking, LeVar, it could be gusting to 30 by the he gets a feeling, he looks at the flags, and he is really a scientist when it comes to special teams. But that factors into, do they run a fake punt? Do they run a trick play? And LeVar's not opposed to running trick plays, as you guys have seen. He is a throwback, but he is as modern a coach as we have on the staff. And he just carries himself with such class. He's not a loudmouth. He doesn't yell and scream. He will yell and scream during the game, but he really is a guy under control and a great coach. And I think a head coach in waiting, when that happens, I don't know, but I'm sure he's looking at Kirk's got a contract through 2029. I have no doubt, health permitting, that Kirk will reach 2029. We have a kind of a standing joke, who's going to retire first, me or him? Because I was there about a year or two when he came in, and he said, what the hell would I do? He said, at least you play a little golf. I go, not very well, but I love to play. He goes, I don't play golf. I remember when he first got here, Mike Riley, who was a great linebacker, offensive lineman, a two-way player at Iowa, All-American in the 60s, played with Butkus and the Bears. He and Wally Hilgenberg were the two starting linebackers and the two starting guards. Mike did the games on WMT with Ron Gonder forever, and Mike lived in Dubuque, and we tried to get Kirk to come up and play golf. His first year here, he said, I'll make you guys a wager. The minute I win a national championship, I'll take up golf. And I've never forgotten that. And that's who Kirk Ferentz is. He says, I got 14 grandkids, and Mary sure as hell doesn't want me home every day, hanging around the couch in the recliner or mowing the lawn. He said, that's why I don't plan to retire anytime soon, because I love doing what I'm doing. And you know what? Good for him. Ferentz is a throwback. I love the guy to death. And he is so right for Iowa. You guys knew that when you were here, and as players, and the players today know it. It's really remarkable. Kirk will be 70 here in a few days. It's remarkable that a guy, and I'm not saying 70 is ancient, don't get me wrong, but a guy can go through as long a career as he has and stay connected to the players as a person. He doesn't do social media. He doesn't do a lot of the things that you guys do. But when it comes to his huddle up after a practice or in the locker room, he's still that Kirk Ferentz that I saw walk through the door 26 years ago. And whether it was Matt Sherman or Robert Gallery to present day Logan Jones to Quinn Schulte, they're all eyes, they're all attention is on Coach Ferentz, because they know if they hang on to his coattails, they're going to go someplace special.
Yeah, it's amazing. We were back for Robert's induction for the Hall of Fame and his name on the stadium, and we happened to see Kirk in the hallway, and it was day of the game. He sat there for 45 minutes, and we were like the only people in the world. And at some point, it's like, man, you got bigger stuff to do today than talk to us. But he just, yeah, he's classic, just down to earth, was asking about things that had happened years ago and plugged in, remember things. Yeah, it's great.
A greater name recall than Hayden Fry. Hayden would remember your first name if he hadn't seen you in 20 years. Kirk's right there with Hayden. He loves his former players, loves his current players, but he loves his former players because you guys helped pave the way for what Iowa football is now. You guys helped pave the way for Kirk to go out and raise $75 million to build that state-of-the-art football performance center, as they call it. And they went from a 2,500 square foot weight room to 12,500 square feet, to 2 practice fields, state-of-the-art practice fields, to America Needs Farmers, to the Wave. Everything he touches turns to gold, and rightfully so, because he's a heck of a football coach. Number one, he's a great family man. I guess 1A and 1B there. A great family man, loves his family dearly, loves his football program dearly. And number two, it's amazing, he still finds time to go out into the community. There's so much that he and Mary have done privately and personally, whether it's Children's Hospital, a scholarship with the School of Journalism. and what he's done around town and around the state. And he's an amazing human being. And most head football coaches have to be in order to stay ahead of the storm that they face every day. But Kirk is extra special. I think I can say that safely.
Yeah, we've been lucky to have him for as long as we have and to have his impact on the community like that. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. Dolph, thanks so much for joining us. We've enjoyed this
thank you so much.
time and getting your perspective on everything. And yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for all you do for the Hawks.
Appreciate the plaudits and the comments, guys. Like Coach Ferentz, I love running into former players as my career stretches out. You'll all be in my book. I'm not sure when I'll write it, but I'm being nudged to do a book, and there's a lot of stories I'd love to put in the book that I wouldn't dare. Most of them deal with total lack of anger, but maybe I'll sneak one or two in there. But Iowa football is so much more than Iowa football. And it's great to be on with you guys. And it's great to know you're doing a podcast. And I'll try not to be 48 hours late for the next one, okay? I'll try and wake up and make sure I'm in front of the camera and the screen. But great being on with you guys. And say hi to Robert for me, and Nick. Brian, great to see you as well. Great memories, and we'll talk again soon, okay, guys?
All right.
All right.
Maybe
Sounds
see
great.
you
Thanks
this
a lot.
fall. All right.
Go Hawks. Go Hawks.
Dolph.